And good morning. Let's make sure we have everything working on the streaming and all. Good morning again. Thanks for being here. Look forward to talking with you today. Just a friendly reminder to make sure and try to remember to talk in the microphones to help with everyone here in the room and then online. We also have a few individuals on the phone with us who have called in. Should be Audra and Rob from Ice Miller. Let me just check to make
Yes.
sure. Is that the case?
It's just Audra, yes.
Just Audra. Okay, very good. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think you all were discussing the committee and the makeup and the quorum, so we'll just move forward. if that's
We'll
okay.
move forward, and the first thing up is the most important thing of the day, the certification of the ballot for the retiree position.
Yes, sir, that's correct, and that's behind tab D in your notebook, and it's basically exactly as you just described. It is the retiree election ballot with Dr. McCoy running for re-election, as well as the other contenders as reflected on the ballot, and the information on the back as well, and we would certainly be happy to answer any questions, but otherwise would ask for the board's approval of the ballot for the retiree election.
I'll make the motion.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second. Is there any other discussion? All in favor by aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. When will the ballots be mailed?
Soon. What is that exact date? I want to say within about a week or so.
Ballots will be mailed on March the 12th,
March 12th.
March 12th.
March 12th.
and deadline for receiving April 16th.
April 16th.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Next item up.
All right. The next item is a revision to the PERS funding policy, and I believe this is behind tab E. And if I could, just a few housekeeping notes and background information so you'll have it. This is something that, as you may remember, Dr. McCoy and I were going to work on since the last, I guess, the December meeting, which we've done that. And I think this reflects his input that's been provided as just as background. If you would, assuming this content is approved, as we formalize it, we'll update the font and the format and the spacing and things like that. And since this has been more of a working document, so just to confirm that, or maybe if approved, put that in the guidance or the motion or whatnot. Also, just for your awareness, this has been a working document that Dr. McCoy and I have worked on in the last few days, and you can see here that I'll go through some of them, the changes that reflect what we made. But I believe what Dr. McCoy did in starting it is he picked up from the last document that I provided to the board back in December and took a clean version of that and then added some of his comments, and we worked together the last few days, and that's what's reflected here. But I say that just to make sure you're aware. There are a few other changes that are not necessarily highlighted compared to the existing funding policies. That's just to make sure you're aware. And if you haven't already, just make sure and glance over the entire thing as opposed to just those that are underlined. That said, though, I don't think there will be any surprises. There's nothing really different. And in fact, a lot of the feedback that's been added in, or some of the edits created or suggested from Dr. McCoy, put some of those changes back for information purposes. So that's just background. Now, with that said, as far as the content of this, and I know Dr. McCoy may want to share some additional information, but I think it's real similar to what I've said in the past, that the update in many ways complies with recent changes in state law and actions of the past of the board, or recent past actions of the board. This still creates and maintains an ADEC policy, meaning an actuarially determined contribution policy, but it also inserts some language in several places that is to recognize when the legislature provides additional funding or cash infusions or dedicated revenue streams or things of that nature. And so to make sure that when the ADEC and other things are considered, that is reflected in there, and you'll see that throughout. And it also continues to provide a couple of different metrics, such as the ADC metric, which in this case would compare the actuarially determined contribution to the statutory contribution rate. Then I'll begin to pause now, but it's mainly just additional funding to reflect that additional funding and to highlight that the board may ask for additional funding to meet certain funding objectives. And lastly, Dr. McCoy and I were just talking about, assuming he agrees and you all agree, as it's approved, and on the first page under item I, funding goals and objectives, we would put something that the objective in requiring employer and member contributions And right after that, we would insert something to the effect of plus investment earnings to PERS in order to accumulate sufficient assets. And in working on this, the last few days, Ed Coble with CAVMAC has also been involved. And of course, he's in the audience today, and should he have any concerns with that addition, I would like for him to let us know. But with that, I'll pause and refer to Dr. McCoy and be happy to answer any other questions.
I would add that, one of the actuarial determined contribution section was proposed to be eliminated. And I felt as if that needed to remain in there because we have adopted that one way that legislature can fund. And if we didn't have that in there, we would not have guidance, in my opinion, to do that, because we need to go ahead and tell them just what employer and the contribution needed to be. Now, we did add a sentence that if the ADAC is ever met, there's no need to do this section. No need to calculate it. The other thing that we added in there was the statutory contribution rate. And we took out the word fixed because the statutory would include any of the other funds that they might do as infusions into the system, because they may choose in the next year or two to raise the employer rate. And if they do so, we need to have a way to track that, or at least that was my opinion for putting that back in there. One of the other things that I thought was important, that in years past, this document had statutory teeth. We could set the contribution rate and it was, unless they changed the law. Now, this is really just a guidance. It's something that we look at that keeps us on top of what's going on in the funds that are coming in. So that's the reason I felt like that we needed to have any of that infusion calculated in that, because the questions that this will answer every time, I think, are questions that's going to be asked by the legislature every time. Because we know right now that the Tier 5 that's being proposed across the street, it is, by the Senate, it is projected to pay off the liability by 1064. But if they say, well, gosh, that looks really good, well, they're still not paying down the liability. They got to add that other cash. I just think that this now encompasses all that for the board, and we have an opportunity to look at all of this data together. I think it's, especially since it's all advisory, it's all recommendations. We have recommended two things to the board, to the legislature, ADEC, and we endorsed a Tier 5. So there are at least two methodologies over there for them to do the funding right now. They looked at what we recommended. So that's my only comments. And I will vote for this as it is now. So.
What's the status of the ADEX recommendation over there? What's the status of it?
They're not even considering it.
It's over there.
That's already, it's over, just over there?
It's just over there.
Is it still alive?
Well, there's been no bill actually introduced that even suggests that.
And to add, the board did vote to recommend the ADEC, which was 25.92% of payroll. We submitted that to the leadership in accordance with the state law. And the current rate, as of right now, is 17.9, and under current law is scheduled to go up to 18.4 in July. But the top end of that phase in is 19.9. So I guess that's a way of saying it's been submitted over there, as they've indicated, recommended at 25.92, but as it stands right now, the top end of that would eventually be to 19.9. And as they indicated, no other action has been required. Now I was going to mention to the legislative committee about House Bill 1 and the proposed $100 million ongoing from the lottery dollars. So that's an additional funding mechanism, but nothing as it relates to the employee
And
rate.
House Bill 1 now says that they will put in $100 million a year until they reach 80%. Now, our projection timelines are 30 years. So in 2054, at $100 million a year, they still won't be at 80%. They need to be putting in $135 million a year in order to get there by 2054. So I'm trying in this policy here, give us an avenue, an opportunity to show them the amount of dollars plus the time. And it's not gonna get there as quickly as some people think that it's gonna do. But, you know, the thing is, they put in 100 billion, and every number that we're looking at has changed. Everything changes. Just as, you know, if we continue on our investment returns, everything will change based on that. It just changes. I love Dr. Miller. What Dr. Miller say?
Dr. Miller, from the time we started this funding policy in about 2013, said, you know, you boys go on and vote for whatever you want to. We're going to change it every couple, 3 years anyhow. And that was, he was right. We have.
But have they programmed in the additional growth each year of number of retirees each year towards
Yeah.
that $100 million?
If you'll go back and look at the data that Ed gave us in the October meeting, in the appendix, there is a page that has, that incorporates all of that. It incorporates all of our assumptions. It shows you the growth of contributions, that's employee plus employers. It shows you the estimated growth of our assets, the estimated growth of our payout to retirees, and it gives you every one of all of that. It answers that on basically one piece of paper. Ed, am I correct about that? It gives all of those answers, and you can do it. And that's the reason on the sheet that Ed gave us, that of course I was talking about, it's 55.9 right now, and in 2054, fund balance is going to be 55.8. If we don't do anything, that's what it'll be. But the two things that are happening is the liability continues to grow, and it goes up about 11 million, and our contribution and investment goes up about 13 million or so. And we have a net plus in the money, but the 55% is calculated off of much bigger numbers. That's both on both sides. That's the reason it's important to give the cash infusion that we have.
Am I misunderstanding something here? We're saying if they enact the Tier 5, that 30 plus years down the road, we'll have some relief. But you're saying that if they just continue to put 100 million each year, we're gonna get further and further behind. So is that gonna affect our Tier 5 doing good down the road? It will not?
I'm not willing to say that. I think that the 100 million a year will help, but it's gonna be about 35 million short of what we need per year. That's what I'm willing to say. Ed, do you want to address that just to answer his question more fully, maybe?
Well, I didn't intend to disrupt everything, just
No,
ask
that's
a
fine.
question.
Well, and while he's making his way up here, the actuary's definitely,
Ed's got to earn his money today.
Yeah.
I was bored back there anyway.
He's gonna talk long enough later on.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, before it, because you may be able to cover this too, Ed. Number one, I don't know that it's necessary to put lottery dollars in here. That's just a suggestion from me. That's real specific and based on probably what's happened, but I don't know that lottery dollars really needs to be in there could just be other funding sources, but before I forget that comment,
Sure.
I'll mention it. But I think the board should probably consider, not right now, this is nothing to do with this today, maybe in the coming months and dependent upon circumstances, when notification under all of these things, no Tier 5, no funding other than the 19.9. Negative return year this year, and all of a sudden, we're at 46% funded, for instance. I think this policy needs to have something to trigger the board to determine whether they need to sound an alarm to people so that they know we think it could be jeopardizing the system. Just go ahead and say it.
May I suggest that we call that imminent danger of collapse? How many years have I been saying that?
Well, if, yeah,
That's probably
But same,
too harsh,
yeah.
but yes,
well, it's not too harsh, I don't think. I just don't know if everybody will know what that means.
okay.
But they do know what jeopardy means.
Yeah.
And that they don't like it when they're talking about their income coming in. So, and I don't know where that point is. I don't know where it is, but I know it isn't 30% for me. That's too much. That's too far down. There's no recovery potential, not a good enough recovery potential at 30% on a plan this big. If it's a $100 million plan, okay, maybe we can, no way. I mean, so, and then if there's back-to-back, not as good years, let's just say not negative necessarily, but not 7, for instance, then I just think the board needs, we're at that point, I think, at 55% of being around the corner circumstantially from being in that situation. So anyway.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
I
you.
agree totally with that, that we need to do that. And my sense is, I don't know the words that you use, but as soon as the legislative year is settled, that will give us some indication of what's gonna actually be statutory in the contributions, and then we can
Right.
get a better handle on projection on that.
Well, and except for YouTube in this circumstance, which may never present itself, I hope, they would be the first people to be notified. Obviously, would be the legislature that, because they are the ones who can ameliorate that. So, anyway,
And they have assumed that mantle.
they have. And that's fine. That's their prerogative, but we need to make sure they're aware first, as much as we can, obviously, with all the real-time information we got, so.
No, I agree. I appreciate the points and the feedback, and I think the content there and the timing makes sense. And to something Commissioner Dale asked earlier, I would say, as you've heard me say before, I think we need additional funding and a Tier 5. And I think both is the way to go, and the sooner the better. Of course, what you just described is in the event if none of those things happen.
That's right. That's right. To be clear.
Yeah.
We're not there yet,
Yeah, sure.
but we're close enough that I think we need to be thinking about contingencies.
Sure.
And not the fact that I don't like surprises really, so, except cash infusions. Those kind of surprises are nice. And I wouldn't suspect the legislature likes surprises either, so just want to get ahead of it.
Sure.
Best we can.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the $130 million. And to answer your question, Mr. Dale. So and this is why we do projections for PERS. It's so important to look at where we're headed versus where we are now, right? So in our projections, we're anticipating all of the active members to retire in the future, right? And for those current retirees to pass on, if you will, in the future as well. So they're going to be replaced. That is all embedded in our calculations, all of those anticipation. So we know kind of where the liability, what the projected future benefits are going to look like in the future, right? They may change. They probably will change from what we are estimating them to be. But it's a pretty good picture of where the benefit payment stream is headed, right? So we need the contributions, and that's why we talk about cash flow, and keeping that as one of the metrics in this funding policy is so important. Because if we're paying out benefit payments, that are doubling in the next 30 years, and that's anticipated, we need the funding to cover those additional 6 billion, 7 billion benefit payments that we're expected to pay in the future. So what we did is we're anticipating, the 9% and whatever the statutory rate is, but the additional contributions will help no matter what, right? If it's 100 million, if it's 130 million, if it's 350 million, which I think is what I would like to get, because I would like to get this plan to 100% funded by 2054, not 80%. As an actuary, we're striving towards 100%, and that takes even more dollars than that. So, so I think, to answer your question, I think, getting 100 million or wherever it comes from, and I guess I like the comments that we just say additional funding, and the change to statutory rate is needed because it's not a fixed rate anymore. It's coming from across the street. We don't know what it is. I think that answers that question. I just wanted to get back to Mr. Breland's question. The policy does still have triggers. It has that language in there. We haven't taken it out. We took out the language that said the actuary will recommend an increase. Because I'm going to come to you every December and say, here's the ADEC. This is what you support. I recommend, you will recommend across the street. So I'm not going to be recommending it. I mean, it could go up, probably will, in some valuations. But that's what I'm always going to be recommending. But I think there's language in here to say, if any of the metrics are in the red signal light status, the actuary will determine and recommend to the board any other necessary funding, like almost additional funding. Like if they're just going to say, we're going to give you the 19.9%, well, now I'm going to give you a number that says, okay, my ADEC is 25%, but if they're going to put in 19.9, then we'll tell you it needs an additional $200 million a year needs to go in there. Wherever it comes from is wherever, but that will be, I think, the trigger and the determination from that. So I think it's in there, and it will help us for that argument, hopefully.
That is a good point about the projections will still be conducted and metrics are still in here and will be in the report. So it'll show, should that negative outlook happen, it'll show that. The board will have a lot to work with.
And the policy itself, I think it's bullet number 3, says that we're aiming for 100%, but the signal lights are at 80%. I mean, that's just a quick and dirty way for us to look and say, well, we're within reaching point of green. It's not, we don't need precisely to worry about it. So that's the reason. I like that still.
Yeah, and your other point about the funded ratio percentage. Yeah, I mean, anything under 50%, if we start heading in that direction, that's when an actuary gets really concerned, and we're not heading in the right direction. You could be 50% funded, like other states. I mean, an article just came out today. Connecticut is the fastest growing, pension plan in the country. They were at 48% 3 years ago, and now they're at 58%. So you could be, it's the trajectory. That's why we run projections, because you could be 55 today, but if they do the funding and we look like we're heading in the right direction, we're fine. But it's that trajectory. If that starts heading below 50%, then there's problems. And you'll be in the red status. That's the trigger.
Right. I think that kind of answers my question, so.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion to adopt the funding policy as presented with a couple of changes that I think the term, just word changes, where you remove lottery and
Put in the investment part.
This will come back next time for final vote, or is this the final vote?
This would be final.
Okay, that's
But
fine.
of course, you can always,
insert statutory and remove lottery and just call it other funding. Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thanks, Ed. All right, the next item, which is behind tab F, I believe, is the annual crediting of interest on member accounts. And as you can see behind that tab, consistent with board regulation, I believe going back to 2016, the recommendation would be that the amount paid or interest paid would remain set at the minimum rate of 1% as of July 1, 2025.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to approve the interest rate?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor, by
Aye.
aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
And the next, on the next tab behind tab G is an update to Regulation 60 dealing with contribution rates. And you can see as you flip through a few changes in red, but basically this is similar to what we talked about yesterday with the ORP plan document. And I believe that a similar change is also included here. This is just simply to update this regulation as it relates to the employer contribution rate that is scheduled to go into effect in July in accordance with current state law, mainly the one that was passed last year. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but that's all this does. And this one would be for initial approval, since it's board regulation that goes through that process.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to approve the change?
So moved.
I second.
Motion and second. Any other discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Anything else under other?
That's all we have today.
Anybody else? If not, the administrative committee will stand adjourned.
I think next up is the legislative committee.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes some of us do embarrassing things. I was waiting on a call regarding the legislative report from a member of leadership, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, supposed to call me back, and the names don't show up on my phone, and I got this call, and I immediately ran over there to answer the call, and went into a diatribe of what PERS was doing, legislative needed to know, and the man is gonna work on my ice maker, didn't understand what the hell I was talking about. So, I'm not gonna be able to give a updated report on legislation at this time. So, Mr. Director, if you have a report.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you look behind tab J, you'll see a legislative bill tracking summary we provided for you. As you'll see, there aren't as many bills as before, as some of the deadlines, especially the committee deadline, has passed. But you'll see a handful there of House bills and Senate bills. Other than talking briefly about House Bill 1, I'm going to focus most of my commentary on the PERS bills. But there are the PERS ones that we've requested, and then ORP, as well as Tier 5. I'm probably going to save that one for last. But there are a few other ones there dealing with charter schools and something to do with the return to work, as well as a tourism-related one with MDA there for your information. As far as House Bill 1, some of this has already been covered, but I was just going to say that is the bill that provides $100 million annually on an ongoing basis of the lottery dollars to PERS, should that become law, until we reach the 80% funded mark. So that's already been touched on this morning. So I won't say too much about that, other than to say that we certainly appreciate that. I would view that as a positive step, and we're grateful of that consideration. Any type of revenue stream or ongoing funding is a good thing. Now, granted, as you all just talked about, in the grand scheme of PERS, $100 million is not a cure-all, but we appreciate the idea and see it as a positive step. As far as the PERS bills, you may remember we had two bills that we requested. One was what I'll call the MDC and Quadro bill, and the other one is the net pension liability payoff bill. Before I forget it, all of our bills in the House have been double referred to State Affairs and then the Accountability and Transparency and I believe Efficiency Committee. I wouldn't read necessarily too much into that. I think that may have, as it being directly toward PERS matters, time will tell, and maybe, but I think some of that may have to do more with just overall legislative process, current posture, and just operations and other considerations within the legislative process. But nonetheless, our bills have been double referred to those two committees. Um, and to get there, of course, they passed out of the Senate. And the MDC bill is the one that adds the Roth after-tax options for the high wage earners in compliance with recent and previous changes in federal law. We also added the Quadro matter or component, Quadro meaning Qualified Domestic Relations Orders. Just for your background, I've talked with Mr. Benson. We have received the occasional question on the Quadro portion. And my thought is, should we run into trouble with that, we would relay that it's okay to take that part out and focus mainly on the Roth aspect to make the changes consistent with federal law. But that's just for your background information. The other one we discussed some at the last meeting about should a employer, for whatever reason, leave PERS like sale, dissolution, privatization, whatever the case may be, that they would be required to pay their proportionate share of the net pension liability. That passed out of the Senate and again is in those two committees. Those are the two bills that we officially requested this year. Now, another one of interest has to do with ORP, the optional retirement plan or optional retirement program that applies only to certain positions within IHL. Now, that's not one that we actually requested this year. We have recommended ORP changes in the past, and so we did have a bill last year that was similar in certain ways, but this one is a little bit different. And in summary, it proposes to close ORP to new participants, and they would be members of the proposed Tier 5. And then it also changes to where the amount that currently goes in for current participants that currently goes into their account, it would be reduced down to 9% and the remainder going to PERS. That's the two main changes, I guess, in a quick summary fashion. Again, we've recommended changes to ORP before. And proposed something last year. This is similar, but not exactly the same. Of course, Senator Sparks is the primary author there, and he's been good to explain that and differentiate that way. I think we do recommend changes to ORP, but this particular bill has some differences in it. And then the last one that I saved for the end intentionally was the bill that proposes the new Tier 5 for PERS and closes SLRP to future members or future legislators. The date in the draft that passed the Senate, where everything, the employees and so forth of the future that it would affect, is March 1st, 2026. Again, it proposes to close SLRP to those future SLRP members. This reminds me, we did have a document, an actuarial letter or impact statement put together associated with the ORP bill at the author's request, and we recently sent that I'll be forwarding to the board. We also have one that's a similar letter for the other aspects and for the other bill, Tier 5, that we'll make sure and send around. And then we had them put together something on the impact and the cost analysis and considerations associated with closing SLRP. So we'll make sure you'll be seeing that in the near future and getting that together, and we'll provide with them and certainly the board. And on the part about SLRP, the considerations are similar to those that you've heard mentioned in the context of a hypothetical question around closing PERS or moving to a full mandatory DC or things like that. It's similar considerations, but obviously the SLRP plan is much smaller and the dollars would be much smaller and likely more manageable. But since we are the administrators and fiduciaries for that plan too, we want to make sure and put that together. We'll be sharing that with you and others. That's just for your information. But the other part of Tier 5, Tier 5 for PERS, referring to a different benefit structure for future employees. The bill that passed the Senate, as you've heard Senator Sparks say, he's very much trying to stay within the framework of what was presented in December and what the board endorsed, and we believe he has done that, and the Senate version, what the Senate has passed, has done that. To recap the highlights of that, one, I'll start with a couple of things where he, and you've heard him mention this, from a benefit description standpoint, that's a little different from that. One is the military credit provision remains. It's in the Tier 5 bill, 2439. It remains. And then there's also a 35-year and out provision that was added. You may remember on the benefit comparison slide back in December, the for an unreduced retirement eligibility. It was 65 and 8 or 62 and 30 for an unreduced retirement eligibility. That's still in there, but there's been a provision added where if you work 35 years, there's no reduced retirement. And you probably remember him mentioning that. The other parts of the Tier 5, like I said, very much within the framework as considered by the board, and it is for future employees hired as currently drafted March 1 of 2026 and later, a DB-DC hybrid. The DB part, the traditional pension part, is roughly half of current PERS, but a 1% multiplier. Then it would have a DC component. The other differences would be no guaranteed COLA on the DB portion, no PLSO option, no service credit for unused leave, be simplified in many ways in that regard, no refund buybacks, things of that nature. It'd be the high 8 or highest consecutive 8 as opposed to the high 4. And the employee contribution would remain at 9%. 4% would go to the DB portion, and 5% would go to the defined contribution part for the individual employee. And the bill as drafted and passed the Senate, it sets up or intends to set up a 401A similar to ORP, but not the exact same type. And again, in addition to in-house counsel in the AG's office, we have Audra with Ice Miller, outside tax counsel and fiduciary counsel on the phone for any questions or discussion you have. There's a summary of a lot of what I just said in the details section or impact section on the sheet in your notebook. I think I've covered most of the highlights. If I left off anything significant, it should be either there or let us know. And on a little bit more detail on the DC portion of the hybrid, and going back to some of yesterday, the bill creates that DC component of the hybrid, and based on the description and the language in the bill as passed, we understand from Audra and Ice Miller that it would, when it comes to the requiring the variable and optional type contributions, as well as hardship provisions, that as passed the Senate would drive us toward a 401A profit sharing type vehicle within the IRS requirements and the different legal provisions. It directs and empowers the board to create rules and regulations and so forth to administer the program. And it, in my terms, and you can read this pretty clearly in the bill, but it directs the board to create an investment lineup. And within that investment lineup, there would be a target date fund. It doesn't use the language target date fund, but that's essentially what it is, which I think we'd want to do anyway. And then that the participant, the employee of the future, would be able to choose and direct and manage that aspect of the hybrid. And so with that, that's the summary of the legislative bills that we're most focused on. Mainly PERS bills are Tier 5. That's a recap of Tier 5. And again, Audra's on the phone, and if she has any comments, I welcome that. And if y'all have any questions of more detail, happy to try to address that either internally or externally.
Right, I've got a couple. Every election cycle, there is a misunderstanding to some degree by people who are in PERS that seek public office. And in some cases, some go ahead and run and get elected and then discover after the point that they can't draw both. Has there been any activity to try to address that legislatively?
No, I would say no. Now, there are some, there may have been some return, I think there were some return to work, as we usually refer to it, bills that were introduced that didn't make it past the committee deadline. And there's a teacher-related return to work similar to last year that's still out here. But in the context of the way I'm taking your question, I don't think anything has been introduced or is not progressing. Is that right? Is nothing? Yeah.
I think there were either 2 or 3 legislators that were elected that had to step aside. And just this week, I had conversation with a guy that's already planning to run for supervisor, and I made mention of this, and he had no idea what I was talking about, but I think he has decided he's not interested in politics.
He has another option, because local officials can run and take 25% of their high 4 average, assuming they've had the separation or they're of age.
So he could
It's
run
the
for the board of
legislature,
supervisors without having to give up his PERS?
Yes.
It's the legislature typically.
It is local,
They
it is a
can't-
local
they cannot
official
do it.
bill. The statute allows local officials, and that's county and municipal.
Yes, sir. The last thing, Ray, is, on the, adding the, welcome center workers, that's not enough to be a factor, is it?
I wouldn't think it would have a material impact on PERS in the grand scheme of things. Now, Ms. DeVetta Lee could comment on that one a little further. I do think this is something where it could have a decrease in the number of members, but I'd say relatively small in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, so I did have some calls with MDA to try to understand how many people are we talking about, what is this gonna look like? And what I learned is that a good number of the welcome centers are already currently closed with no staff.
So that's not
something that has
not a
to come out.
factor, okay?
It won't be that big of a deal, but it was highly debated, particularly in the Senate committee, about the impact to PERS, and it just created a lot of conversation in the trend of writing people out of PERS. So that's why we were keeping an eye on it. We're bringing it to your attention, but we don't think it's going to have a huge impact because it's just for the welcome centers, and I forget the exact number, but several of them are currently inoperable or under repairs or something at this time. So their idea is that they would give the grant to the county, and the county would their idea is that they told me that it would be like senior citizens who make coffee and make friends in the welcome
When you
center.
point at me, when you refer to senior
No, that's their concept, is that it really wouldn't be a full-time job. It would be a part-time role with seniors who are, to welcome visitors to our border entrances. So their idea is that it wouldn't be full-time benefits eligible positions. It would just be hourly. Yeah.
Are there any other matters legislatively? Yes, sir.
As everybody knows, I voted against the Tier 5. I might say that we voted to endorse if it was a similar bill. And I might say that because some of these things are changing, it is no longer a similar bill. So, I'm just saying that the numbers will change with these changes that are proposed here. Some of them I actually agree with and think that they need to be there, and it's going to have a negative effect on the numbers that we saw previously in the December meeting. So just wanted to make that comment. Second thing about, and it's actually not about in House Bill 1, not about the 100 million, but it's about the tax reduction. Now, the Senate has just done something. I've not had a chance to look at that, but let me just share with you. This is just my thoughts, and somebody please correct me. If I am retired already and I'm on a fixed income and the legislature does away with state income tax, well, if I am in a qualified retirement plan and I'm getting income, I don't pay any state income tax to begin with. Okay, so if they take away the state impact, that doesn't have any impact on me as a retiree. But if they allow the locals, county and city, to raise taxes, and if they raise taxes on fuel, then as a retiree, now this doesn't make any difference whether you're a PERS retiree or just a general retiree, you as a retiree are going to see an increase in taxes. Now that's just my perception of that, and I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'd like somebody to share that with me. This tax reduction thing may actually be a tax increase on me as a retiree. So just wanted to bring that up and kind of point that out.
I do think you don't pay income tax on your retirement because the legislature previously passed a law that exempts your income, so you've gotten a head start on everybody else. But I think the rest of what you're saying, if your sales taxes go up and you
I mean, I don't pay any
sales
now.
taxes, it's a consumption thing, and so if you consume the same amount, you will probably pay more in sales taxes.
Yeah.
If you consume less,
Unless it
you will
was
pay
same-
less. So it may
unless you're-
depend on what year you look at.
And the food, and your food situation with whatever they do with
Yeah.
the sales tax on
That-
groceries, however that impacts.
That might be a negative, but as I see it, just on me personally, I'm probably gonna get a tax increase, you know, because I don't plan on not going and seeing grandkids. You know, I'm gonna keep traveling and doing that
If you
stuff.
decide
So
to get a
I just wanted
part-time
us to
job,
know
you'll
that-
save some on your
that there
taxes.
may be a negative impact on retirees in the state if we're not.
Instead of the commissioner at the tourism center, we might have Randy at the tourism center for a part-time job.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to touch base on that other part, and that's not just PERS retirees, that's any retirees in the state that may have an increased tax burden. So just, I don't know if that has been discussed, or I've not seen any discussion of it at large. It's just me making an observation.
Well, I sure can't answer that. As
Do what
chairman.
now?
I said, I sure can't answer your question.
You're chairman of the legislative committee. I thought you should
You
be
should know the
taking care
answers
of
to
all
this.
this.
I'm still worried about the ice maker right now.
There you go. I apologize.
Are there any other questions?
I do want to mention something when,
All
at the
right,
right
go
time.
ahead.
Well, just real quickly, going back to the return to work or the supervisor, the best thing, if you could, anybody that comes up, just make sure they check in with PERS, because it really depends on if it's a local official, like Mr. Benson said, or if they're just going to be working or running for state office. So it just depends. The other thing, I had something I wanted to discuss with the board, just briefly survey you, I guess, informally. And it has to do with the Tier 5, and it has to do with the options at retirement. Now, just to remind you, when you retire, you have several options that are intended to be actuarially equivalent that you get to choose from. Well, as we were starting the conversations and working through the details on drafting the Tier 5, it came up internally about, with the Tier 5, would this be a time with a different benefit structure and just the fact it's a new tier, would it be a good time to maybe streamline the number of options, or rather, instead of having 6, 7, or 8, or 9, maybe we have 2 or 3 or something to that effect. And in talking with Senator Sparks early on, he offered to include those kind of changes and extended that offer. He wanted it to be a PERS request or a PERS, PERS request, but he was willing to do that. At the time, I opted not to do it, and the reason is because even though they should be actuarially equivalent and so on and so forth, because I thought that's more of a public-facing benefit type structure. No matter how good the intentions might have been, I was concerned that that might inadvertently create a question or an issue or a concern, so I declined to do that. But now that we're back here together and I have the board in front of me, I want to just broach that subject with you and get any feedback you may want to share. It may or may not be too late to do now, since the bill's already been drafted, and so that's certainly understandable. But while we have a little time, we're here, I just thought I would ask you to kind of gather your feedback. And I don't have strong feelings about it, but would you have any concerns if we were to consider streamlining that to where there are only a couple options instead of 6, 7, 8, however many they are? And of course, I'm happy to drop it all together, but since we had a little time and I had a chance to ask you, I wanted to check.
And you're referring to the 401A proposed or the 457?
No, it'd be the other side. You know, like right now, when you retire from your PERS DB, you got option, you got the max
options at
option and you
retirement. I
got all that.
Okay.
So instead of having so many, do we, for Tier 5, want to make that 1 or 2 options?
The 4B, and you got the 4B10, the 4B15, the
I got you.
4B20.
You got the
Yeah.
max and then you got the other.
75%,
I
yeah.
got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to do anything to complicate anything, and I didn't want to do anything to be misunderstood, but since I have you,
I just wouldn't want that to distract from or imperil the overall
yeah,
legislation.
yeah. Which means it probably at this point needs to just stay as is, but
Yeah.
I thought about doing it at the time, but I didn't want to do anything that would be
I-
misunderstood.
I would think somebody who's retired could let me know, because I may never get there, who knows? If I got more options, that's better for me, and I'm not gonna complain about that. If I've got fewer options, that may be a complaint and a detractor from a system that's already a lot different than what we got now,
Yeah.
so.
Well, my sense on that is that we ought not do it this session, that we ought to study it. Now, here's the reason. See, one of the main drawbacks with the hybrid plan is if you annuitize your 7% growth over your life, there is a distinct possibility that however you may outlive your benefit. And that is one of the biggest issues that retirees have, that are not in a defined benefit plan. Right now, it is my sense that the guaranteed 20 and 15 and 10 is generally done by someone who has other retirement income and needs it for a specific length of time, that may be a beneficiary or something that needs it for that. But I would have a concern of, the only way I would be tending to look toward that is, since the DB is so small now, I would eliminate all of those and make sure it's a lifetime benefit. Now, that would be the direction that I would leave, because I would hate for someone to take a 10-year and then their the 5% that they took a 10-year there, and they take a 10-year on this one, and in 10 years, they're still living and they don't have any retirement income. I mean, that would be my concern. So I would think that would, we don't need to do it now. There's quite a bit of thinking that needs to go into those considerations.
From an actuary standpoint, is there much difference to PERS between the different options?
They're supposed to be actuarially equivalent, but of course, it's going to depend on how it plays out.
Yeah,
The member always gets a lifetime.
Would you come to the microphone, please, so I can hear you?
You can tell
Oh,
them.
either
Both
one or
of you.
both of you.
Yeah, come on.
play actuary.
I'm pretty good at it.
Come on up, Ed. Come on.
I was just gonna say, Dr. McCoy, the member always gets a lifetime benefit under all these options. It's really for their beneficiary.
I
So,
understand.
okay, I just wanted to be
I-
clear. The member's not
I
gonna get just
understand
10.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as the present value of any of these options equals the normal form of payment. So, yeah, there's no difference in liabilities or anything.
There's no increase in the amount of money that they're gonna get over time, is what you're saying. I mean, that's.
Right, they'll-
It's done.
Right, there's gonna be winners and losers.
It's the
But, yeah.
individual need that I think that needs to be considered for them and their personal circumstances. And I think that that's a thought that requires a good bit of thinking.
And this has taken out the PLSO, so that's the big item that it
Right.
removed.
I was gonna point that out, is you've already eliminated PLSO plus all these options.
And of course, if you have the defined contribution accumulated account, that would possibly give you your option of
What you
a
wanna
lump
do with it.
sum, if you want to do it.
Now, I know Audra's on the phone, but I believe you have to have a 50% joint and survivor option if you're married.
No, that's an ERISA provision.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah, governmentals don't have to. You just have to
Okay.
have an annuity option
That's just
in a
my
defined benefit plan.
It's just my plan.
And I wouldn't think you'd want to remove that if you were removing anything. You'd want to leave the 100% for sure. And then if you removed anything, you'd be looking at the 50 or the
And the
75.
75% was just added, like, within the last 10
When the
years or
rate went to
so.
9%.
Yeah.
That's when
Yeah.
we put that one in.
Or does that suffice, answer your need? Or are there any other?
Well,
Well,
the executive director brought it up. I think.
it does for me. I appreciate the thoughts and feedback, and that's, of course, some of the reasons exactly why I didn't want to do it, and appreciate that along the way. Appreciate it just now. A lot of good things to consider, and sounds like we won't be talking or dealing with that at all now, maybe between now and next session or at some point in the future.
If Tier 5 passes as it is, then we might want to look at it between now and next session if the implementation date's long enough, far enough out,
And I think
to
that
change those options prior to the implementation date. if you
and the
wanna do anything.
implementation date has been added to the bill, I think, of March 1st. Is it?
That's correct. The current.
So what does that do with our, getting ready to handle that? Is that March 1st of a year from now?
That's right. It's March 1st of 2026.
Okay.
Now on that, I still would recommend, regardless of how it's worded, whether it's effective date, implementation date, or maybe just applied to employees hired after a certain date, however that works out, I still would recommend the July 1 of 2026. But Senator Sparks has indicated he's certainly willing to work with us on that, as indicated by the March date showing in there. So something we'll continue to talk with, talk about.
A nuance that needs to be considered is there is a difference in schools between a hire date and a contractual date. In other words, a board may act and hire somebody and make it official, but the start date would be out here. So that needs to be thought about, because they would actually be hired by the board and guaranteed a job now, but their contract may start.
But if they didn't receive compensation, then they weren't in the plan. They're not in the system until the start date. And on our form, does it say start date of service or something? What does it say? Start date. Oh, she says the form says hire date, but if there's no wages for you, then you don't get service credit for, like, if you get hired in May and don't start until August, if there's no wages until August, then you wouldn't start, you wouldn't enter the system.
So on our past tiers, if they were, for tier 4, if they were hired in March and started work July, they went to tier 4, they didn't stay in tier 3.
Yes,
Okay.
Money comes into the system.
yes.
I
Wages.
just wanted to, I didn't
Yeah.
know or understand
Good point,
that
though.
precisely. So a board that wanted to hire somebody under a different tier could start money in March or whatever,
February or
or
whatever.
February or whenever, and it would be
February,
in a
that's right.
different tier. Okay.
Not that they would ever do that.
Anything else?
No, sir, that covers it. Now, we do have a little time if you would like me to give a little update on some of the preliminary considerations around implementation, or if you would like to hear a little bit more from Audra on some of the aspects to consider with the board administering and creating the 401A, we can. And we could certainly keep that 15, 20 minutes, or, certainly less than 30. It's around 11 o'clock now.
I
Or
would
we
like
could break.
to know a little bit about the 401A, especially if, and I don't know this, if like school districts or counties or whomever want to add additional funds, and they can increase those funds for that employee, is that going to be completely outside of PERS? Or
Oh, sure.
I just want to know more about all that.
Well, I'll kick it off with a brief summary in my terminology, and then turn it over to Audra to expand and explain more. But as I understand it, some of the intention behind the bill is to have, of course, there's the mandatory contributions that we know about, but also to have the variable and optional contributions. And to your question, it would be part of the individual's account. It would be part of their DC account. There's also an intent to have the possibility for hardship type withdrawals in the event of an illness or something like that. In trying to consider all that, that drives us toward the 401A profit sharing. So to your question, it would be part of their account, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And Audra, if you want to take it from there, and feel free to amend anything I said and expand further.
Is this still part of the legislative committee?
It is, I would think so.
Okay.
Unless you'd rather adjourn it and
Just
stuff.
when it was on a general discussion.
Yeah.
If it wasn't.
Because it all has to do with the proposed legislation creating Tier 5. Yeah.
Continue.
Go ahead, Audra.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. So I don't have anything to correct from what Ray stated, but yes, based on the structure and the key features that the legislature indicated that they desired, primarily being the ability for the employer to make additional optional contributions to select individuals' accounts. That's only allowable in a profit-sharing 401A defined contribution plan. And secondarily, they wanted the ability of the members to take hardship distributions from the account. And you can't do that with a money purchase plan, 401A money purchase plan. You can only do that from a profit sharing. So there are two types of, I guess I should back up and explain, there are two types of 401A defined contribution plans. There's a money purchase pension plan, which looks very much like your defined benefit plan, except it's a DC plan. So similar type of restrictions that really you can only take a distribution, certain in-service distribution allowable, or retirement, but you would not be able to have a hardship distribution. And it would also not be possible for the employers to make these optional one-time contributions to a money purchase plan. So that led to a profit sharing plan. It's called a profit sharing plan, but that's not really an accurate name for it. It's a historical name, but you don't actually have to have profits. So governmental employers can sponsor a profit sharing plan. Administratively, it's more complex than a money purchase plan. It will be quite different for PERS staff to administer. Certainly they can do it. Can also use a third-party administrator to help administer it, but it will be a more complex plan. The way the employer can make these optional employer contributions is through some type of participation agreement. So every time they want to make these one-time contributions, they're going to have to complete a new participation agreement so that PERS or the third-party administrator is able to accurately track the contributions. And that is what officially changes, and I'm using that term kind of loosely, changes that employer's plan, if you will, to allow for that contribution, is that change in the participation agreement. In addition, it's just a different type of plan. So money purchase plan, the theory behind a money purchase plan is generally you want people to only have access to their funds at retirement. You're encouraging retirement savings, and you want to be sure that people are ready to financially be stable at retirement. A profit sharing plan can sometimes look a little bit more like a savings account. It's a little bit easier to get your money out prior to retirement. So those are kind of the key differences between the two, but they're both allowable under federal law.
And Audra, can we add in that ORP is currently a money purchase plan, just for their understanding of the differences?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for saying that, Devetta. Yes, so ORP is a money purchase pension plan. So as I mentioned, it will be a difference in administration to switch to a profit sharing plan.
Question on the additional contributions. Does that have to be a blanket offer to all employees within an institution, or can I pick and choose and say I've got I want to give math teachers extra. I want to give a doctor of some sort or a certain nurse level, and not do the entire match or additional contribution?
Correct. Yes, you can. What federal laws say, you can discriminate among employees. So exactly like you said, or like we often see coaches, certain coaches' contracts are coming up. So we want to give an additional contribution to somebody who's in that position. And so, yes, they can pick and choose among employees.
Many of the, all of the teachers have contracts. So if you add that to a contract for this year, and all of the teachers are essentially one-year contracts, should that contract be a separate contract? And then next year, if they do not merit that, then it can be withdrawn next year and they go back. Now, the reason I ask is because teachers have protections if they lose a job. And if it's tied to a job and they don't lose the job, but they're losing compensation for that job, does it have to, is it a different contract, or how is that managed? And I would say within our state laws of actually being able to do that, because what pops into my mind is all of a sudden based on merit. If some school district says, okay, your children all come in performing on a level 4, and they should have 1 year gain of education, they should leave on level 4. If they do, we're going to add some additional money. But if they don't all get, if you don't, on average, whatever the district does, now you're going to lose that. So how do you go in and out of that? And also you have to tell them by March, after the budget is set from the legislature, you got 2 weeks to tell everybody whether they got what their contract, or if they're going to be renewed, and that sort of, how do you manage the contractual nature of that?
I don't want to step too far into state law, so Devetta, feel free to jump in. Typically, what I can say from a broader standpoint is that because this is a new plan and applying a new plan, new members, the plan will set forth that this is all discretionary. So it wouldn't be bound by each, if they do it 1 year, they wouldn't be bound to do it continually through the rest of the contract. So the plan will be very clear that this is discretionary and it will be up to the discretion of the employer to make those additional contributions.
Well, I understand that, but when you give them that money, that's going to increase the amount of money that's going to go to the defined benefit if it's not part of the contract. In other words, you know, if
This is just going straight to their 401A. It won't increase their salary.
The DC.
doesn't come here at all.
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying now. I was just trying to get all of my thoughts out there right now on the complications that may occur with that particular.
I assume this is a deposit directly into their 401A by the employer, and it doesn't increase their salary from 50,000 to 52,000 or whatever. It is a.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Thanks for clarifying that. They won't have the option to receive it in cash. It will just be directly into the defined contribution account.
Because I can see school districts having department chairs can get additional funds. And now the question is, what does the district have to pay on those funds when they put it directly in there? Does that go on their W-2? How does that relate?
It's deferred compensation, just like it is now when there's a contribution to ORP or the defined benefit plan. It's deferred compensation, so it won't increase their wages on the W-2.
It's in that box 14 on
For taxable purposes.
taxes. It's on there for informational, but it's netted out from your,
I understand that, but if I'm putting it in their account, do I as an employer have to pay any Social Security or any of those kinds of taxes? Because it is a benefit to them.
I can't give legal advice, but I think the only thing sheltered from that is gonna be something like a Section 125 cafeteria plan or something.
I mean, I can see, some differentiation, like a chairman of a department to get X number of dollars, and this is an easy way to do it because I don't have to get off the teacher pay scale and that sort of thing. I can just do it over here, and I want to know what the liability is for the employer on these other taxes, the payroll taxes.
Audra, is it true that these employer contributions, including the variable ones, would be treated just like now in ORP employer contributions are treated?
Exactly. It would not be any different.
They're on wages, Dr. McCoy, not on the benefit pieces of it typically. All of them. Doesn't matter which one. They're all based on the wages, not on Social Security or anything else. It's just strictly on that. Sometimes gross, sometimes there's a net wage, but however the calculation is, those are all based on that employee's.
It doesn't increase their Social Security wages, is what you're.
And they would pay taxes on this money when they take distribution. Is that right, Audra?
That's exactly correct, yes. It's
Oh, this
deferred
is a
compensation.
deferred comp then?
It
Much
is.
like deferred
It
comp.
is.
Oh, okay.
For tax, for the personal tax purposes, I would say they're probably not different at all.
But it does not impact Social Security wages or Medicare wages. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, it's treated the same as ORP.
Yeah, I mean, those are unearned, those aren't earned
It's
wages.
not an earned, it's not.
They're exempt. These are completely exempt from FICA.
Just like the insurance benefit. Typically,
Yeah.
that's reported.
Contractually, the employee is going to look at it as income because it's going to be something they can withdraw later. I mean, it's their money. I'm going to pay it to them. So I'm still not clear on contractual and state laws and you know, if all of a sudden.
Probably,
next year-
probably won't be in the contract, I would assume. It would just be an optional amount.
Well, and I would say this too, just briefly, I think it'd be true to say that, of course, state law is being crafted right now, which creates this and empowers and directs the board to create the plan document and administer that as appropriate. And I think, even though I would like Devetta and Audra to confirm for me, a lot of what's been discussed recently, which are very good points and observations, but I think they're going to be mainly considerations between the employers and the person. I think.
Yeah, that's true. So if we're talking about a compensation package, is I think what you're thinking through. Any contributions that would be paid through their contract to PERS would be paid to whichever vendor gets this work. So it's not going to change. If they're going to be paying money to PERS, then they will be paying money to this vendor, no matter when they work, when they terminated, all those things. It would be based on, if the money should come to PERS, then the money should go to that vendor for the DC portion as well. They will go together, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, it's just that my money goes to ORP, I mean, not ORP, but deferred comp now. So I still get a statement, and I'm just thinking about the complication that the school district is gonna have with contractual employees and how they're keeping up with the different wages and what is tax. I mean, I don't know how they'll do all that.
Yeah.
But I'm just concerned about the interlocking of that. Now, if this in the legislation says all of this is treated at will, and there, it's not a contract, but I just say there's going to be some complications out there that people are going to have a lot of questions about, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think, y'all correct me if I'm wrong on this, but typically, Dr. McCoy, employers don't have contracts. They're day-to-day. Schools are kind of the exception to that, but most employers are day-to-day because they don't want the employee to feel like they're tied there, and they certainly don't want to be tied to an employee they don't want having their workforce, so.
But these are great questions. So as we're developing policies and a plan document or regulations, these are good things. Even with our employer reporting, when they're working on employer trainings, our customer service, these are good questions so we can make sure we're ready to answer those questions to our schools that are, almost half our membership. So, and the universities often have contracts as well. So these are good questions. We'll figure out all the details and make sure that we can train our employers accordingly.
Yes, and I wanted to piggyback off what Devetta said, just as a reminder, even if it passes as written in the statute, PERS and us made it clear in the statute that there will be a separate plan document. So all of these details will be flushed out in a separate standalone plan document.
That's it. I hope that was helpful. I know it kind of gets into some complexities, but it's always good to discuss a little bit since we had some additional time and in case you had questions as you did. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Any further questions, any further comments for the legislative committee? Then we'll rise and report.
All right. I think that's all we have until the full board meeting at 1 p.m. Y'all are good. Thank y'all. Thanks, Ed. All right, got everything.